It's now time to talk about Israel's war on Gaza. As always, here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we talk about Israel's war on Gaza on a daily basis to cover what mainstream media refuses to cover. We break down what corporate outlets don't acknowledge. We do all of this work for the single and sole purpose of helping stop this awful genocide that's happening in the Gaza Strip. And we call it a war on Gaza because this is not about fighting or defeating Hamas. This is not about a war that just happens to be in the theater of Gaza. No, this is about a full-fledged destruction, a full-fledged depopulation, a full-fledged devastation, a full-fledged degradation of the Palestinian people and the entire territory of Gaza and really Palestine writ large. And so we cover this in this way every single day. And I begin my coverage of the war on Gaza with an analysis of the numbers. As of right now today, 32,552 Palestinians have been killed, and 74,980 Palestinians have been wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. Of course, the death toll in Israel from Hamas's October 7th attack stands at 1,139, with dozens of Israelis and foreign nationals still held captive. I have done a Gaza update for a very long time. I haven't done it since day one, but I've certainly done it for more than 100 days. Not one day, not one day has the number stayed the same. Obviously, the number can't go down. But the number could stay the same. The number could be relatively stable. But it's not. It goes up dramatically every single day. And the reason is because the Israeli military, the Israeli government has a structured and organized and systematic and consistent attack on the Gaza Strip that plays out in every single sector of it. So much so that today, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has had to order, quote, unhindered aid to Gaza at scale. They ordered Israel, again, to prevent genocide, and they gave it 1 month to report on compliance. So let me give you the context once again. In January, the International Court of Justice made an emergency deliberation, an emergency ruling about the plausibility of the case of the case of genocide in Gaza. And they said that there is plausible case of genocide in Gaza. They didn't say that Israel had been, they didn't say Israel definitively was committing genocide. True. They said that the case is plausible. And despite what the Zionist disinformation campaigns will tell you, they did not say that Israel was not committing genocide. In fact, the case was much stronger than Israel was than it wasn't, and they imposed a set of emergency measures that said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And all the things they told them not to do were the legal definition of genocide based on the conventions on genocide. And then they also asked Israel to submit these monthly reports to show what they were doing to heed the court's request or the court's ruling. Over time, one of the things that we've seen consistently is that Israel has not increased or even supported aid to Gaza, aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. And South Africa has pushed and followed up, because South Africa, as we all know, South Africa were the initial complainants. And what we see consistently is the International Court of Justice echoing what human rights organizations around the world have said, what governments around the world have said, what observers around the world have said, which is something very simple. This is a genocide. This is a genocide. And the examples that we see of this being genocide aren't just measured in the amount of people bombed or the amount of people shot, although all of these things are absolutely the case. But we also see the denial of aid. We also see the denial of humanitarian resources. We also see the destruction of the built environment so thorough that people can't access basic things like water. Today, a 5-year-old boy died of malnutrition in Gaza. Now, this wasn't the first boy to die. I believe he's the 28th, if not the 29th boy to die of malnutrition in Gaza. And his story, the story of this Palestinian boy, this Gazan boy, is emblematic of the deeper problem, right? Which is that Gaza, and particularly the north of Gaza, is on the verge of famine. And once you hit famine, it's very hard to undo. And the UN said very clearly that, quote, time is running out to prevent famine. And they said, please lift the aid restrictions immediately. And yet Israel continues to refuse to lift the aid restrictions. So the genocide we see is based on that, right? The genocide we see, particularly in the north, around food insecurity, or not even insecurity, it's just food scarcity, famine. All of this stuff that we see is because Israel has blocked aid. They have shot people and killed people on their way to access aid. They have destroyed the trucks bringing the aid. They have obstructed ships and other things that offer aid. They have done all of the things almost to a T that enable an outcome like the one we're seeing right now. And Palestinians can't even access their own resources because the built environment's been destroyed. So it's not like you can just go farm. It's not like you can go milk a cow. It's not like you can get water from a well. They destroyed almost every well. Over 112 wells have been destroyed since October 7th. So if you can't get water, you can't get medical aid. They've destroyed almost every hospital. And the biggest one, the central one, Al Shifa Hospital right now is being attacked consistently and sieged, and it has been since almost day one. So when all of this is happening, there's not much you can do but struggle to survive. And even when you surrender, and we have footage from Al Jazeera that we talked about yesterday, but now has emerged definitively, where one man is even waving a white cloth as a sign of surrender, and the Israeli troops still shoot him. And then they bury their bodies with a bulldozer near Gaza City. This is what we're dealing with here, y'all. We're talking about a level of destruction and devastation, but also cruelty and indifference that trumps anything we've seen in previous Israeli operations. What we saw in Operation Cast Lead in 2008, 2009, what we saw in Operation Protective Edge in 2014 were nothing compared to this. They had maybe combined 4,000 or 5,000 people died in both of those operations put together. We're looking at almost 33,000 people dead now. Right now, 2/3 of Gaza's hospitals are non-functional. 24 hospitals are completely non-functional. And the ones that are functional are so degraded, they're so limited, they're so stripped down of what they can do. That they're basically like urgent cares. This is not a small thing. But we got more information. This morning, Al Jazeera Arabic reported that Israeli forces launched air attacks on northern Gaza, including Gaza City and the Shati and Jabalia refugee camps. So in addition to the starvation and the malnutrition. We're still seeing airstrikes in the north, just like in addition to the violence and destruction in the south, we're still seeing malnutrition and humanitarian abuses. But separately than that, there was footage obtained that shows Israeli soldiers shooting 2 Palestinian men who were walking along the coast towards northern Gaza. The two, both who had white pieces of cloth raised, were then buried by an Israeli bulldozer. Again, this idea of people waving white flags, waving white cloths, signifying surrender, and still being killed. It's disgusting, it's disturbing, it's unethical. It's also a violation of the rules of war. So when I tell you every single day these numbers keep going up, I'm not being dramatic. Almost 160 Palestinians were killed between Monday and Wednesday. 195 were wounded between Monday and Wednesday. This is largely based on the north. Again, in the last 72 hours, 160 Palestinians were killed. Another 195 wounded. Again, 2/3 of the hospital destroyed. The International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies reported that the healthcare system in northern Gaza has been largely destroyed and is, quote, on the brink of collapse in the south. This is what's going on. And instead of figuring out a ceasefire, instead of figuring out a peaceful solution, instead of figuring out a diplomatic solution, you have people talking about more invasions and more destruction. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been very clear that he is committed to a ground invasion in Rafah. Rafah is in the south. It has 1.5 million Palestinians in it right now. There's only 2.2 in the whole Gaza Strip. Rafah is supposed to have a couple 100,000 people in it, but it has 2.2 million in it right now. And a ground invasion, by all accounts, will be a humanitarian crisis, a disaster. Even the most Israel-friendly nations, people like Germany and the UK, are like, please don't do this. But Netanyahu keeps going. And he was in negotiations. Israel was in negotiations with the United States. Netanyahu was in conversations with the U.S., particularly with the Biden administration, about the ground invasion in Gaza. And they were supposed to have some high-level meetings, but then Netanyahu got mad, took his ball, and went home. He canceled the meetings a couple of days ago when the United States didn't veto a UN Security Council resolution to that was ordering a ceasefire, a 2-week ceasefire. And so Netanyahu got mad and canceled all his meetings with the White House, which raises a lot of questions about whether the United States really has the ability to rein Israel in. Now, obviously, if the White House makes the phone call and says, look, no more money, no more weapons, no more support, no more diplomatic protection, there's nothing Israel can do. Israel could just turn its nose up and keep fighting, but ultimately they'd run out of resources very quickly. So I do think there's more the U.S. could do, but as a practical matter, where the United States doesn't seem interested in doing those things, the fact that Netanyahu is still thumbing his nose at the U.S., canceling meetings, telling them they've lost their moral. What did he say? He said that that the U.S. was retreating from a principled position. What? Netanyahu is no longer in his feelings. He called the White House reportedly and asked to reschedule the meetings. So they're besties again. The bromance continues. Separately, more than 130 parliamentarians in the United Kingdom urged the government on Wednesday to immediately suspend licenses for arms transfers to Israel. Go figure. Now, again, that doesn't mean the UK is going to do it, but you're seeing political pressure in the UK. You're seeing political pressure from the United States. Hopefully, you'll see more from France, all sort of pressing their respective governments to no longer provide weapons and money and political protection to Israel as long as they're engaged in these actions. We also want to point out the fact that in the south of Lebanon, at least 9 people were killed in 2 separate strikes on Wednesday as fighting continues to escalate between Israel and Hezbollah. In Gaza, Spanish military planes did drop 26 tons of humanitarian aid on Wednesday, and Madrid called on Israel to open land border crossings to prevent a famine. We're seeing support all around the globe right now. There were large crowds that recently rallied in cities across Morocco to denounce Israel's assault and calling for a ceasefire. In Jordan, we saw the same thing. Hundreds of people protesting against the war in front of or near the Israeli embassy in Amman. So we're seeing lots of stuff going on. And of course, UN expert Francesca Albanese published a report accusing Israel of genocidal acts in Gaza. And she has announced that she's been receiving threats. She's been called anti-Semitic. A spokesman for the U.S. State Department dismissed her findings because they said she was anti-Semitic. It's absolutely absurd, but this is what's happening. Before we go, though, I want to also talk about violence in the occupied West Bank, since I know a lot of y'all want to know about that. The Israeli military has carried out a series of arrests throughout the West Bank in the last 3 hours. No killings right now, but it's multiple arrests because of these coordinated security raids. According to the report, 2 brothers were arrested following a raid in Abu Dis, which is east of East Jerusalem. A man was also arrested in the town of Ashiyuch, which is in the Khalil Hebron governorate, while another was arrested when Israeli forces stormed Sarta, which is a village west of Selfit. So we're seeing continued violence and stress in the West Bank. Nobody is safe here. And we need to talk about all of it. I want to change gears here.